Welcome to the One Stiletto in the Grave podcast with your hosts, Sonny Ormond and Jane James.
Well, hello everyone. We're feeling a tad overexcited today and not a little cultured. Our guest today opens up a window, nay, even a skylight on all that is Ambridge. We talk columns, not Doric. We talk goddesses, not Lillian. We talk swats, rifts and dispatches. We even talk speedos. Have you guessed it yet? It is none other than writer and journalist extraordinaire, Charlotte Higgins. But first, a word from one of our sponsors. Are you ready to cast off those dull old blacks and greys and embrace colour? Kettlewell sells high-quality wardrobe essentials in more than 300 colours. From everyday basics to jackets, skirts, dresses and scarves, each Kettlewell style comes in a range of colours in 4 seasonal palettes, so you can choose the exact shade for your skin tone. And when you wear your perfect shade, your skin looks fresh, glowing and youthful. We're ready to embrace the rainbow. Are you? Visit Kettlewell at www.kettlewellcolours.co.uk.
Hello everyone, we're so delighted to have as our guest today a journalist who, amongst her many other talents, writes about Ambridge every month in The Guardian. She is of course the wonderful Charlotte Higgins, whose A Month in Ambridge column is adored not only by Guardian readers, but also by thousands of Archers fans who share it shamelessly on message boards. And it's loved within the Archers cast WhatsApp group as well, isn't it, Sonny? And as well as writing about Borsetshire, Charlotte is The Guardian's chief culture writer and an award-winning author of 3 fascinating books about the ancient world, plus a book about the BBC called This New Noise, which is superb. I've just finished reading that. And her newest book, The Greek Myths, a New Retelling, is just out in paperback. So, welcome, Charlotte.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a real joy and privilege. And I'm reeling from this information that the WhatsApp group of the Archers cast thinks about, even devotes a single second to A Month in Ambridge. I'm kind of flattered and terrified.
Well, it is absolutely true, Charlotte, and I'm so thrilled to meet you. Of course, it's Lillian here. Hello, darling.
I'm going to explode. I'm going to explode with joy. I mean, honestly, you've got no idea. I mean, you have no idea what an honour this is. Why do you need to...
Now look, what I need to know, darling, have you got your gin bottle there? Have you got your gin? Because that's the thing that we need to get us through this. Have you got... No, seriously, you are. We hold you in great esteem, our lovely Archers cast, because you write the most marvellous columns about it, and particularly recently, the columns, with regard to our lovely Jennifer's parting from the Archers has had us all in tears. And in fact, that certainly there were a lot of WhatsApp messages coming up on our group from that. And indeed, if I'm correct, and Charlotte won't mind me saying this, it was dear Charlotte Martin who posted that wonderful piece and said, "This is the most beautiful piece. We must all read it." So there you go. There you are. Accolade. Wonderful.
Oh, that's incredible. And I mean, honestly, Jennifer's death was extraordinarily sad, and lots of people I know, maybe it's something to do about reaching a certain age, but lots of people I know mentioned it because obviously among my wider circle of friends, I'm now the person you talk to if you want to talk to about the Archers. And lots of people came to me and said that they'd been really, really affected by it because it tapped into so many... if you've lost a parent or you've lost anyone close to you, and it's not just about that kind of grief, but it's also the thing that the Archers does so well. It's about the ramifications on every single family member or people who knew her. And that sort of thing of, my friends were reminded of the sort of bad decisions that their fathers made after their mums died, or... there was another friend who was terribly, terribly, terribly upset by it because her mother had died in a really similar way. And, I thought of my own mum, who is really the reason that I listen to the Archers, who died 4 years ago. And she she absolutely loved the Archers, and it was listening with her, before sort of before I even got to school, as a toddler, listening to the lunchtime Archers, and also she was in some ways a bit like Jennifer, So it was genuinely extremely sad, and I think this is the sort of extraordinary quality of the Archers, is that it just sort of it mainlines into people's hearts at moments like that, because of its incredible longevity, because my theory about the Archers is that time is really the main character, and so I've known Jennifer all my life, and it's terribly sad. It's terribly sad.
It does. I think it becomes. I mean, I'm in the Archers, but I'm also a listener, and I do think it becomes part of your DNA. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And we were, when you get the scripts, and there's the same kind of ripple effect within the Archer family. I mean, obviously, my character Lillian was Jennifer's sister, so the ramifications of that were, absolutely huge as an actor, but also as a human being, because again, you're losing somebody you've been very close to. I was her sister. Well, I've been her sister, still am her sister, but for 22 years. So it is that it really does affect you, because Lillian, in a way, is my alter ego. I know that character as well in some ways as I know myself. But you so beautifully and was so eloquent, stated. The wonderful imagery there was wonderful. It was so eloquent. And I'm, if you don't mind me quoting just a couple of lines for those people out there who may not have seen your column, but you said, "How does one become so fond of the invisible creatures who speak to us from radio? These complicated people who, after all, are made of sound waves, of vibrations of air." And I thought that was so beautiful. And I think it touched us as well as actors within the Archers, because we strive so very hard. We've only got our voices to create these three-dimensional characters. And I just found that so touching. It was beautifully put. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think you spoke for a lot of people in the way that you wrote about it. Was it a difficult one to write?
Yes. Well, in a way, yes, and in a way, no. I mean, it was clearly, there wasn't any debate in my mind about what was going to be the focus of that month's column. So in that sense, it was easy, and I suppose, but I suppose the tricky, I mean, it's a small thing really, but the tricky technical point in that column was that a lot of other things had happened that month too, which you sort of want to reflect, and it is like the texture of life, right? That lots of very ordinary and trivial and kind of funny and stupid and mildly upsetting and irritating things happen. And then out of nowhere, this really big, shocking thing will happen. So I wanted to reflect both those sides of the Archers, which to me is also, that's life. That's how these things really do register. Like, something grandiosely awful happens, but still people around you are doing terribly ordinary, amusing, trivial things. So yeah, that's what I wanted to try to get across. But I really felt she was such a good character. I think she's such a good character. And one of the things that I like about her, and it's a thing that she shares in common with other long-standing characters, also your character, Sunny, is that there's a sort of, I think because the Archers, it does go through different viewpoints, it goes through different editors, it goes through different writers, and that leads to a certain inconsistency in the characters, right? But I think that is genius, because actually people are contradictory. People don't stay the same. People go through different phases. Often art presents us with incredibly coherent views of existence and life. And actually life isn't like that. So I quite like the sort of nubbly, is Jennifer this person making apple pie? Is she the same person who was that kind of rather radical person in her youth, or was the kind of local historian? Yes, because over time we do contain these contradictory and kind of broad, a whole sort of universe of different elements. So I liked her. I thought she was a really interesting version of a kind of female character, She contained so much. Yeah. So I really miss her. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the ramifications, as you so rightly say, of how now this is going to develop within the family, and already there's a restructuring of a dynamic of the family in some ways. You know, Alice is almost becoming the young matriarch in a way, but you know, with Rory and taking on that kind of mantle. I mean, there's millions, isn't there, of strands that are going to sort of develop from it, but yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's already happened, and we as actors, of course, in a way, are rejuggling that as well in our relationships with each other. So it's fascinating. It is fascinating. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, like you say, when someone goes, for whatever, the remaining structure has to rebuild itself around that gap, doesn't it? And I, noticed that in a way in my own family after my mother died. There's a kind of, the things just shift, and that can be a positive thing, but it certainly can create change. And of course, drama, it's all about change and conflict, isn't it? And with plenty of that in the Aldridge family.
Certainly is. And you said that you started listening to the Archers as a toddler with your mum, which is so lovely. Have you listened to it continuously? Did you sneak off to your room at university and listen to the Archers, or
No,
have you?
I think there were gaps. There were sort of definitely sort of university shaped gaps. But I had a radio, and it would come on if I wasn't doing anything more studenty. And so no, it's been with me all my life, and all of my family listened to the Archers, and at times it was even like a sort of UN peacekeeping device, because if the Archers was on, we sort of flipped from being lunchtime to 7 o'clock listeners. And there was a whole period when I was a teenager where it was really useful to have it on at 7 o'clock, because that was supper time, and then we couldn't argue because the Archers would be on, honestly. But and also my family would take up really strong positions about plot lines. I remember that my entire family just hated. This is so terrible. We beg forgiveness, Susan Carter, now. But they hated Susan so much. Do you remember when she was in prison? Of course you remember when she was in prison. That my family would like throw away the key. There was no nonsense about free the Carter one. It was absolutely merciless. Obviously, I don't know. I mean, she's such a great. She's such a fabulous character.
But it does bring that out in people, Charlotte. I mean, I've got a one-woman show that I've been taking around for a while, and I always do a Q&A in it, And I mean, people they're so passionate about the characters and about storylines, and why did that character go, and why is this, and I hate that, and I sort of gently say, we are actors, actually, not real people. But yeah, that is it. It gets into your DNA, doesn't it? And it's very interesting that point of view.
So now you're writing the column. Has it changed how you listen to the Archers?
Yes, it has, and actually not necessarily for the better. Actually, in the following way. Well, I'll tell you what happened. I wrote a long read about the Archers to coincide with the 70th anniversary. So we have this section in The Guardian, which is very sort of highly reported, highly crafted. I'm just doing one at the moment, and I'm on the third draft, and it's sending me crazy. It's really sort of, you spend a lot of time with these pieces and try and make them as polished and beautiful as possible. And I volunteered in a no way sort of self-serving way that would be a kind of lovely idea to do one about the Archers, because it's such... if you're from the outside, if you're not a Radio 4 listener, or, if you are from abroad, let's say, it's the weirdest thing. It is extraordinarily odd that this drama has been going on for 70 years and has this kind of, manic fan base, and started off in the way that it did as sort of part of an agricultural advice program post-war and so on. And so I really like, in my writing for The Guardian, I really like looking at British institutions, and I do think the Archers is a British institution, and working out what they tell us about ourselves. What are they functioning as? So I did that, and it was fascinating. I did it through the pandemic, which was kind of tricky, but there it is. thought about it, spoke to lots of cast members and Jeremy Howe and script writers, and learnt a huge amount about the intricate and amazing way in which The Archers is made. You know, fell in love with Vanessa Nuttall, who, you know, why wouldn't you? And the Spot Effects person, for those who, you know, are listening and don't know that, but she is the genius behind the sounds. And occasionally she writes me an email saying, "Thank you for noticing the whatever sound."
Oh, bless her.
Which
Oh.
is
Well, no,
always
she's
heartbreakingly lovely.
it's brilliant.
And then after that, sometime after that, in a kind of mad moment, I wrote to a colleague who commissions stuff about TV and radio for The Guardian, and said, because I felt like I'd learnt a lot about The Archers and I could use this learning in other ways, plus the lifelong enthusiasm for the show. So I wrote this email to colleagues saying, I just don't know, how would you feel? Here's an idea. What if I picked up Nancy Banks-Smith's A Month in Ambridge column, which had been, you know, in abeyance for a few years since Nancy had stopped doing it. And I didn't even think about it. You know, I didn't even think, oh, so Nancy Banks-Smith is like one of the 5 best writers in the 200 years of The Guardian. And maybe it's not a tremendously good idea to attempt to pick up something that she has done with such genius. And so, I mean, I wouldn't say that of many colleagues, but Nancy Banks-Smith is she's a goddess. So I don't know why in this crazy moment I thought I could do that. Anyway, the suggestion was accepted, and then also we obviously very carefully wrote to Nancy, or the editor wrote to Nancy to check she was okay with that. And I have to say, like the sort of email that you want to print out and stick in your study by your desk from Nancy, sort of basically wishing me well with it, with a few choice Nancy-ish words. It was just fabulous. And then I started. So getting to your question, sorry, I haven't spoken to anyone for a while because I've been in edits for this piece. So, chat. Getting to your question, it has changed the way I listen, because I don't miss a minute, and therefore what I do is, instead of just listening, you know, I would normally be a sort of 7 o'clock listener, but that obviously, you know, my life, because I'm a culture writer, involves being out in the evening a lot. I wouldn't necessarily get to, well, I binge listen at the end of the month. So I go for a really long walk or two and listen to a whole month's worth. I might have, you know, I will have heard a few bits and bobs through the month, but I do that. So it means that I only knew Jennifer. I knew Jennifer had died from people WhatsApping me and saying, "Isn't it awful?" Oh, okay, fine. Yeah. So yes, it has changed, and I don't. That's a sort of slightly odd thing, but it's just professionally necessary for me, because I'm a SWAT. I can't do it if I haven't really concentrated on it and made notes.
No, that's really interesting, Charlotte, how you do that, because I did wonder whether you sort of, you know, went into a darkened room and heard it all, and one of my questions was going to be, do you tend to scribble your thoughts down with each episode, or do you absorb the whole lot and then, you know, get everything written down?
Well, I'm generally walking or kind of maybe gardening, and I will, if something, it's usually something just that something piques me or amuses me, and often a phrase or just a tiny bit of dialogue, and then I'll make a note, often just on my phone, and maybe just reel back and make sure I've got these choice words that whoever, that you or Susan or whoever has said, and then it will give me something to sort of riff off. And I think I've learned also, I think I took time to be able to do this job okay, you know, that I think I've learned really from Nancy that what this column does, if it's sort of functioning, is obviously we just pretend, we absolutely embrace the illusion that The Archers is real. You know, there's no point. It's not a review. It's an immersion. It's a kind of, it's a little kind of dispatch from Ambridge. and it's not, we're not going to get into, you know, whether we think the scripts are good or not. And I have learned that actually from people who read it, because they don't want that. They want a little dispatch. And that's how I've decided that it works best. With some jokes. Or sadness, you know,
jokes.
whatever, yeah.
I think I still remember there was just this sort of, it's just such little things, but you know, when you describe Joy's boyfriend, Mick is his name, as being large of girth and small of speedos. I mean, that's just brilliant. And that just describes him. And what's that, sort of 6 or 7 words? It's very, very funny.
Yeah.
But it's all from the writing, isn't it? Because one of the things, I remember an actor friend of mine, not in The Archers, but who was in the long-running series about the First World War, whose name I've forgotten, which was, you know the one I mean, right? Which was also...
I can't remember what it's called, though.
None of us can remember. It doesn't really matter for the purposes, but she was recording in Birmingham. And she just in a very... She's a brilliant actor, she just happened to say to me, the thing about The Archers is that they're so good at making you know where you are, making you understand where you are. And I just thought, that's incredibly simple what you've just said, but of course, you know, we don't even think about this, but I you know, I know what the bull looks like. I know what that kind of funny suburban garden with the it was that description of Mick came out of the sort of hot tub, ridiculous and amusing hot tub series of episodes. And you just know, you know, you just know what that hot tub looks like and what Mick looks like in his Speedos. But because it's all in the writing and it's all in the sound design and it's all in those kind of, you know, subtle, all the kind of beautiful, subtle things that the creators of The Archers do to create this incredible illusion. So, yeah, that's just a reflection of what's created, that you have these sort of flashes of...
Well, I think that you've taken over seamlessly, you see, from Nancy Banksmith. I mean, when I read your column, I think, well, you know, it could almost be her in many ways. I mean, I just think the humour, the whole, the overall attention to it, and I think, just as you have said, that's what Nancy, I think, used to do as well. You know, it was just the camera clicking on it. Not making any particular comments about it, but the camera clicking on it and sharing with the listeners or those who maybe didn't listen what was going on. I just love your columns. I think they're brilliant. So well done, really.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, and I think, you know, stylistically, I'm just not Nancy, and that's fine. You know, and that's totally fine. But I think her way of framing it, you know, I'm never going to be Nancy. I'm never going to try to be like Nancy Monson. But I do think it's just right to take her brilliant way of framing it, like you say, that kind of snapshot, and then I all I can do is do me, which is it's always going to be a bit less brilliant than Nancy, but you know, that's life. I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, don't do yourself down. It's a wonderful column, and you know, you can make us laugh, you can make us weep. You know, that column about Jennifer. You know, you finish that off something about, you know, she died because she had too weak a heart, something that could never have been said about her in life. That was just, you know, I go a bit tearful just even now, you know, because it was such a beautiful way of putting it. So it's just very, very lovely. And I just love this image of you doing this sort of like mega omnibus edition on your walk, listening to all those episodes in one go.
I'm going to do it. Bombarding myself with Ambridge. I'm going to be doing it on Monday next. That's my next Archer's Day. And I'll be doing it in Rome. So I'll be stomping through the Giardini Borghese. listening to Eddie Grundy. I love it. Listening to Eddie Grundy, And that scoundrel George wrapping everyone around his little finger.
Yes. So where are you in your listening of it then at the minute, Charlotte?
Oh, I'm in a kind of weird, like I've heard some episodes but not all of them, so I've got sort of patchy.
Right.
So the reason I mentioned George is that I heard him manipulating Clary and Susan about the question of whether he was going to be allowed to have a party, and you just want to go, no, you don't let George have a party in any domestic space. Like, put him in the cider shed, anywhere.
Yes.
But don't be insane, people. And they're all going, oh, George, you're a good lad. And you're just thinking, aren't you, of that smoking postbox.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a naughty, naughty boy.
It is all that. You reminded me when you're saying that, the way that the Rory and Julianne story is sort of panning out, and I sit there and I'm in it, but and I listen to those scenes and I go, oh no, Rory, no, you just get completely involved. No, please don't somebody do something. Alice, come and do something. Yeah, it's very unusual, I think, the Archers in that way, that you do become completely absorbed by it.
Yeah,
yes, and I heard the dulcet tones of Townsend Gregg as well. That was nice to hear. But again, you did want to kind of reach through the radio and say, just stop there. Stop at that bit where you said sorry. Just stop there.
Yeah. That was why I asked you, actually, Charlotte, because I didn't know how far you and I this week, of course, have been listening, and I thought some of those scenes were fabulous, actually, between her and Charles. But yeah, again, another machination that's come out of this whole Jennifer's death. How will this fat? You think, my goodness gracious, how is this going to turn out? Really,
not well. I think
not well from any point of view. I think
not well at all. So, given that you are like chief culture writer at The Guardian, what do you make of Culture in Ambridge then, and Linda Snell's attempts to bring some sort of cultural pursuits?
I love it. I love it. I love that Linda has tried to bring, Punch Drunk style immersive ambulatory theatre, site specific into the village. I absolutely love it. I kind of was hoping that we would find that Vince Casey was a really proper art expert when he had that sort of interaction with Russ, so I slightly regret the departure of Russ because I quite enjoyed him. Who knows, maybe he'll be back. But yes, other than that, it's a bit, nobody ever talks about what they're reading, do they, or anything like, it's a bit, I don't. Do you think Lillian's? I imagine she's a bit of a Jackie, not Jackie Collins. Well, maybe. I was there. Jilly Cooper must be pretty big in Ambridge.
I would think so. And I'm just thinking, as we're talking now, we do not have a book club. We need a book club, don't we, in Ambridge? We do not have.
Wasn't there one at one point that lasted about a week?
Was there? Maybe there was. Maybe that was why I don't remember it, if it only lasted a week.
I don't know. Tell us, listeners, if you can remember.
Maybe.
I might have just made that up.
I should suggest to Jeremy that possibly Lillian, of all characters, decides that they're going to be a book club.
Well, I think so. Greek myths and new retelling would be an awfully good book.
That's right. Well, I know one book club that just reads all of Jilly Cooper and then goes back to the beginning. So maybe it could be. The thing, Jilly Cooper must be Lillian's favourite author, don't you think? I mean, I don't know. What Sonny, you
I think she. I'm not sure though that Lillian is really a great reader. I think she's out there, on Aziz and Amir and trying to sort Justin out and walking Ruby and getting herself. Yeah, I think doing her nails really. I think that's.
And Jim, of course. Jim.
It will be Jilly. It will be Jim Cooper.
Yeah,
definitely.
I mean,
definitely.
Jim. I studied classics at university, so I have to. I get a little thrill whenever Jim breaks out into Latin.
Oh, you did last night. You'd enjoy it.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I do have a thing. I love the Archers so much, but I do have this thing where a friend of mine who also loves the Archers, a very, kind of sophisticated writer and academic, said to me, "But would you want to have a drink with any of them, Charlotte?" And I did think, maybe Lillian, but beyond that, it's really hard.
Yes. That was a question actually we were going to ask you. Actually, who in Ambridge might you like to have a drink with? Well, I'm very flattered that you'd have a good time. That's for sure, darling.
Oh
You'd have a
yeah.
very, very good time.
Oh
Lots of
yeah, yeah,
gin.
yeah.
Yeah. But of course, Linda does desperately, doesn't she? She does try and bring culture to Ambridge in her own sweet way. I mean, we had, of course, Anthony Gormley. Do you remember that? A few years ago, was that with the Plinth time? I think that was 2009, and I do remember some wonderful scenes there.
Yes,
Um,
yes, that
we
was
opened the,
hilarious. Yeah. And
yeah,
I
we opened
also
the,
had hopes for Christopher. Do you remember when he was making various sort of avant-garde garden ornaments for people, which they were very nonplussed by? There was that. I thought maybe that was going to turn into a sort of more creative bent. And of course, there was the extraordinarily unlikely William Grundy's pottery, um, which he seemed to gain competence remarkably fast in that, by the way. Extremely difficult potting. Anyway, there you go. So there is culture.
We've not
There's
seen all the
culture
great pottery
everywhere.
throwdown, have we?
Not yet.
Today's podcast is sponsored by MTL Associates. Would you like a website but don't know where to start? Could your business do with that bit extra? It's less than you think. MTL Associates produces websites for people like you. They'll agree a fixed price for their work, starting from £50 for a 5-page website using one of their templates. And after that, it can be as little as £14 a month. MTL Associates. It's you, but online.
I don't like to think of Ambridge as a soap opera. I like to think of it as dispatches from Borsetshire. But for those who do think of it as a soap opera, do you watch any TV soap operas, or are you not engaged with those?
No, I never really have. I mean, I shared, in my youth, I shared a house with a Brookside watcher, a Liverpool person. So I watched that very briefly. It was in a sort of good golden age of lesbian snogs and stuff like that. It was terrible, really. I mean, I've watched maybe about 3 episodes of EastEnders and so it's just it's no, in short, it's just not me. And I think I sort of in my life, in the particular life that I lead, I can't quite imagine it either. The Archers has always had that quality. I mean, now it's a bit different for me because of this actual professional sort of responsibility to listen to every single episode. But it's always had that wonderful quality of it being something to which you can also be kind of cooking the dinner or whatever, or pottering about doing something else. So you're with it, and it's alongside you in your life, rather than you plonking yourself down 5 days a week or however many times TV soaps are on now. So yeah, it seems for me it sort of occupies a slightly different kind of cultural. Maybe it's just that we were snobs in my family. I mean, that's also, we just didn't really watch East, but somehow The Archers was okay, and I'm not quite sure why.
but and are you a real radio listener, generally?
Yeah, I am
Would
a
you?
real radio listener and increasingly a kind of podcast listener. I'm an absolute Radio 4, Radio 3 person. Yeah. And there are things on Radio 4 I absolutely love. At the moment, I'm listening to Gordon Carrera's programme about the 20 years since the Iraq invasion, which is absolutely brilliant. I've been listening to that on my phone, on my walks. So good is it that I actually emailed him to tell him so, which is a rare occurrence. And I love Tim Harford more or less. I'm quite a geeky listener.
No, I mean, I think that's great. One of the things I was wanted to ask you, because I'm not a writer, Jane is a writer, and obviously you're writing the column. How are you with deadlines, Charlotte? I mean, are you somebody that is very organised? You've got your deadline there, and I'm going to work this out methodically, or are you one of those people, I've got the deadline, I better get on with it?
I'm afraid to say that I'm absolutely brilliant with deadlines, and I always hit them. I'm not really a last minuter, so I suppose
Yeah.
if the defect is more that I like to plan and I like to know what I'm doing and when. So I'm probably a bit more flaily aroundy if things change, suddenly. But no, I can do a deadline. I mean, I think, to be fair, most journalists can, because you sort of have to. But
Yeah, I'm sure.
even so, I note from many years of observation that I am possibly better than some of my colleagues at that particular thing about journalism. I mean, there are many other things, right? But I'm quite good at hitting the deadline.
Yeah, I would have
Yeah,
thought you had to be, some people live quite dangerously, don't they?
yeah.
And don't. Or you probably have to train yourself to do that, even if you do tend to live dangerously. I would imagine it gets to a point where, if you don't, there's a lot of Valium that has to be consumed otherwise. Just before we maybe leave the Archers, if you were given the opportunity to become a scriptwriter on the Archers, are there any particular stories that you might like to develop?
Oh, I oh well, that's a really interesting question. Um, I I'm interested in it all, really, and no one should ever make me a scriptwriter. I was slightly thinking, I mean, I know this is a contentious point, but I was quite pro Sean O'Connor, and I quite liked I quite liked that period when The Archers was basically a Wilkie Collins novel or a kind of George Eliot. It's like a Victorian melodrama, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I know not everyone was for that, but I quite enjoyed it. So I might be doing some, dredging up of Thomas Hardy or whatever, to get some really, really strong events and catastrophes, and just mess with everybody a bit. But long term, I mean, inheritance is just this kind of ongoing thing. The generation shifting, isn't it? And those things that are going to play out slowly and gradually over the years. What is going to happen to Lower Loxley when you've got the sort of feckless male heir and the kind of, very efficient female non-heir? How's that going to play out? And all that's terribly interesting.
And how,
Maybe you
farms
should
like
burn Lower Loxley down, and I don't know, events. I want some events.
Oh,
some
I
major
still
events,
think, okay,
major-
here's one thing specific. I still think surely the Grundys are going to find some massive Anglo-Saxon hoard of gold and silver in
that
the
be
fields around Britfield, and
Yeah.
sort of somehow transform their fortunes in this way by splitting, because you'd then split if you sold it, you'd then split the takings with the landowner. I don't know, I just kind of feel like
Yeah.
that it felt like it was what's the amazing TV program that we love with Toby Jones in it?
detectorists.
Yes, there was a sort of lovely
Yeah.
detectorist vibe to that, and I would
Yeah.
like to see that sort of re-emerge.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
would be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before we started recording, you mentioned that you're off to Ukraine shortly. So tell us about that. Where are you going? What are you doing? What's it about?
I'm going to Kiev, and I'm going then points east to do some reporting. The thing is, when last year I went to Kiev for the first time, it was really because we felt in The Guardian that, and I made the argument specifically, I suppose, that the invasion of Ukraine is based around, actually, it is based around culture and identity. It is based around Putin's false idea that Ukraine doesn't have its own existence. It doesn't have its own culture. It doesn't really have its own language. It doesn't have its own sort of raison d'etre as a country. And I think most wars probably do have culture lurking in there to a greater or lesser extent, but it's not usual that the aggressor in one of these situations would actually frame the invasion as cultural. And so it seemed a really interesting and important thing to do, to try and reflect what that meant, and how specifically how Ukrainian cultural figures were using culture as a means of resistance, and sort of insisting to the world that actually they do have a distinct culture, and they do exist. That is what they are. That is their project. It's to say, like, we're here, we exist. This is our culture. And so I had an extraordinary, it was a really inspiring time in Ukraine in October last year, and have sort of been badgering my colleagues at The Guardian to let me go back, and which was really banging on an open door, because they quite liked, or very much liked, I think, the sort of reporting I did that was a bit different from the normal kind of frontline reporting. It was more reflecting that, you know, if a country's at war, the whole country is at war, and that plays out in all kinds of different ways. And if you use the lens of culture, then you can start seeing things in that country that that just sort of focusing solely on the military side of it would not show you. So it's been a very transformative experience, actually. Not least, I mean, I you know, obviously I passionately believe that culture is hugely important for all kinds of reasons, not least because culture tells us who we are, and it's really fundamental to reflect that aspect of life in the way we describe the world in a newspaper. But going to Ukraine showed you that in this kind of extraordinarily difficult and violent situation where everything is at stake, culture doesn't become less important to people, it becomes even more important to people. And that was moving and affecting. Yeah. So yes, I'm going back to do more of the above in a couple of weeks' time.
And how long will you be there, Charlotte? How long will you be there, do you know?
Couple of weeks, yeah.
Okay.
Which is about the sort of we've got a complicated rota of reporters, and we sort of go in for 2 weeks and then out again. And, yeah.
I think that's just such an important thing to do, because you can't always be. So much of what we read about the war is through the lens of, you know, fighter jets and bullets and military stuff, but this is really, as you say, this is really what the front line is, isn't it? It's about, do they have a right to exist as a people with their own culture or not? Is it
Exactly.
depressing to be there, or is it? No, you said, because you said it was uplifting.
I think I said it was inspiring. I mean, I suppose it is also uplifting. I suppose the what's inspiring, although it is also incredibly sad making at the same time, excuse me, is the just seeing the grit and determination often of incredibly young people. I mean, a lot of the most impressive people I met are kind of 25-year-olds, and, you know, they've had to gain a lot of wisdom beyond their years very quickly, and they're just, you know, they're doing stuff, you know, they're resisting in using the means at their disposal, which might be cultural, with every fibre of their being, and it is inspiring. But heck, it's you just sort of, I mean, it's terrible that they're having to do that, you know. It's terrible. And I was only in Kiev last time, so there were cruise missile attacks and things, and people were killed. But obviously it's not like the it's not, you know, it's not like the kind of grotesque death and destruction that's on the front line. And I think, yeah, the vibe would be really a little bit different. But yes, I mean, I suppose. It was inspiring in the sense that it was a reminder of how important culture is, and that's a spine stiffener. That stiffens your spine when you come back to thinking about how culture operates in our society here.
Yeah.
And how fortunate we are, eh? How fortunate we are, because, you know, there but for the grace of God, in a way. And what happens when suddenly it was overnight, wasn't it? Suddenly the whole world is just completely turned upside down in every conceivable aspect, and also with culture as well. How, you know, it's our humanity as well. It's about trying to keep connected with our humanity, isn't it, in those awful circumstances.
Yeah, no, totally. And, you know, if Britain were invaded, it would be very important for the Archers to keep recording. It would, just as it was important, you know, whatever people say about the quality of the the archers during the pandemic. Let's not go there. But it was important that it kept going, and
Absolutely.
it would have been frightful actually if that hadn't kept going. And similarly, the Opera House in Kiev reopened at the back end of May last year. That was pretty shortly after the Russians had withdrawn from encircling Kiev. And it's really important to people that they can spend a few hours, put their lipstick on, go to the opera, and have a few hours where they're not just thinking about the war. It's really important. And that's also moving. Yeah.
And is this one of the things, because you're very passionate in The Guardian in your defence of people like Eno and, arts organisations in general who are under attack and, getting funding removed or under threat of disappearing completely. So does that sort of fuel your fire?
It does actually, yeah. It really does. When I was there, I remember writing about. So I was there at the end of October, and I went to the opera, and then in November there were these funding announcements that included English National Opera being defunded. And the sort of confluence of those things that made me very sad and very angry. Also the BBC singers and the BBC orchestral cuts. BBC singers have just had some kind of reprieve, but I'll be interested to see the details of that. But I've done a lot of work. You mentioned that I've written about the history of the BBC, and I have done a lot of work on the origins of these groups and why they were formed and what they did and who conducted them and who wrote for them. And you just think, how you what you're gonna get rid of this choir that Stravinsky conducted? What the I just it's all it's unspeakable. It does make me very angry,
isn't it? Yeah, it makes me really angry too. It's just so dismissive. This doesn't count.
And the problem is once it's gone, it's gone.
Absolutely.
I can remember that ever so briefly, but we were talking about in the 80s because I came through the repertory system. There was a rep virtually in every town when I first left drama school, and how I remember it was the Glory of the Garden or something at the time, and there were so many theatres that suddenly went to the wall because funding was taken away. And it's just trying to hang on to these things for as long as possible because it's about humanity. It's about feeding our soul. It's about the spiritual side of life as well as much as anything else, and it's at our peril really that we disconnect from all that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think also I think if you turn it round as well in a funny way and look at it and from a slightly different angle, I think that when all these things are functioning well, it's a symbol of a well-functioning society, and when they're not, it's like a symptom checker. It's like things are amiss. And I think looking at Britain from the outside at the moment, people are shocked, particularly about these BBC, the cuts to the BBC orchestras and choirs, and they look at something, something's not right. Something's not working. There may be other evidence for things about Britain not quite working at the moment, possibly that they may have noticed, but this is sort of adds to it. Yeah.
Definitely.
Indeed. Now, it's been fab. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. And one of the questions that we always ask our guests, and we'd love you to answer as well. What would you say, Charlotte, to your younger self, if you could?
I would say listening to the Archers is not time wasted because you were going to be able to use that in your future career. And actually that is a really, really kind of, more broadly, I think that's the kind of thing about stick with the stuff that you're passionate about. It doesn't look very important now, but the stuff that you really care about is gonna pay the mortgage later, but also it's going to enrich you and kind of, you're going to get a lot out of it. And I suppose the other thing, probably say something like, don't necessarily get married to absolutely the first person who comes along. Lovely as that person was and remains.
Good advice on both counts. Thank you so much from both of us, Charlotte. It's just been an absolute joy to talk to you. Really, really lovely. And we can't wait to we can't wait to read your next column, because this last month has been a humdinger. So enjoy it on your walk on Monday, and we look forward to reading all about it.
Yeah.
The pressure is on.
And safe times in Ukraine. Safe times in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been an honour, an absolute honour. If my younger self could have seen me talking to Lillian Bellamy, she would have been very impressed.
Well, look, thank you, darling, so much. It's been absolutely marvellous. I'll see you in the Bulford Gym. Bye, darling. Bye.
Bye, Jane.
Thanks for listening to our One Stiletto in the Grave podcast. If you'd like to see behind-the-scenes clips and bonus content, please visit our Facebook page, One Stiletto in the Grave podcast. And if you'd like to ask any questions, follow us on Twitter at OneStiletto65. This podcast is produced by Raggedy House Productions, and the music composed by Tom Smith. See you next time!